Very good evening to you and welcome to the Bottom Line, a wrap of the business news of the day. I'm Frances Third and we start, as we often do, with the number of the day. Let's take a look. It's 65 billion rand. Now, this week, Brand Finance said that cumulatively, South Africa's top 50 brands stand to lose over 65 billion rand. That's about 15% of the brand value of those top 50. COVID-19 testing the resilience of these brands. This week, Brand Finance also revealing South Africa's top 50 most valuable, ranking them once more. MTN retains the title of the most valuable brand. It's valued at nearly 50 billion itself. Life Healthcare has forged ahead, although healthcare brands themselves are suffering somewhat due to COVID-19. So to discuss, we're joined on the line by Brand Finance Africa MD, Jeremy Sampson. Jeremy, thank you for being with us. And let's bring up on screen the top 10 brands. So MTN is still right at the top. It has 250 million subscribers across African and other countries. Vodacom, the strongest brand in terms of recognition. And here, COVID-19, you say, may actually be helping those telecom giants. Tell us more.
Hi, Francis. Good to be with you. Yes, you're absolutely right. You know, when you actually look at the sectors that are doing well, Vodacom and MTN are positioned in that area where we all need connectivity, and especially the people who've been isolated or alone, or you can't visit them, or for whatever reason, they're using their phones more, especially the older people, and perhaps the bottom end of the pyramid, if I could put it that way. And then in the middle, people are using their computers a lot more. So a lot going on. And then there are the sectors that are doing, of course, incredibly badly, like airlines, like hotels, and sadly at the moment still restaurants and pubs. So there are certain sectors that are going to be fine, others are going to struggle, and others are just hoping that government regulations will be relaxed pretty shortly. Because again, you have tobacco brands, and we had for a time alcoholic brands as well, and everyone is having to adjust to the new norm, as it's called.
So I'm going to ask you about those rankings, but first, staying with MTN, I mean, this company is being investigated again in another country, and we've seen at least 3 incidents in Iran, in Nigeria, now Afghanistan. When will that actually impact on the brand value?
Well, it's interesting that they are in 21 other countries other than South Africa, and they're in countries that are, after all, pretty high risk. You've mentioned Afghanistan, but they're in Yemen, they're in Iran, and they're in Syria. And these are all areas in the Middle East, and people forget that it's not just an African brand. It stretches into these territories. So, you know, if you go into those areas, you're going to have difficulties. But despite that, the brand has remained strong. Yes, its value has dipped just below 50 billion. Last year it was for the first time over that 50 billion bar, as it were. But, you know, when you talk to Rob Shooter, he's got to manage these issues, and that's what he's doing. Some countries go up and down. Nigeria, as we know, from time to time will be difficult as well. But that's what you manage, and this is what global brands have to face up to. You know, there aren't too many South African brands that have the footprint. In fact, I can't think of one that has the footprint of MTN. People like Old Mutual, I think, are in about 14 African countries. Sasol is stretching out around the world as well. But most of them are only in 3 or 4 countries in southern Africa, and that's difficult enough. You know, we see the difficulties that people like ShopRite Checkers have had in Nigeria and other parts of Africa. So I don't think this is unexpected. There's always going to be some drama. There are always going to be some court cases, and sometimes you get into difficulties which you can't manage and you weren't aware of. You just suddenly find yourself in the headlights, as it were, of the world media. And I remember, you know, Vodacom with Telecom a couple of years ago also had difficulties in Nigeria. So it's par for the course. You've just got to manage it.
Manage it well. All right, let's talk about Life Healthcare, because you say that's South Africa's fastest growing brand. So tell me what they're doing right. And then also, I mean, you talk about Mediclinic, Netcare as well. So they're all at the front of this pandemic, but they're not going to necessarily see better revenues.
No, and no, we know that Mediclinic's share price has wallowed for some years now. I think, was it last year in the UK, it was in the bottom 20 of the Financial Times index. So it's a difficult area, and they're not benefiting, if I can use that term, from COVID at this stage. But the one that seems to be least affected, and it's been slow and steady, has been Life. I think we have a typo in our report that we said they had 900 beds, they have 9,000. But they're strong, they're steady, they're keeping out of the limelight. They also have a new CEO. And sometimes, in these difficult times, being a little bit conservative, keeping the focus, the steady eddies are going to do better than some of the others. And Life has done very well and is performing very strongly.
And interesting, so the elective surgery and things like that, that's put on hold, that's affecting revenue.
Absolutely. And, it is interesting how when you look at some of the brands, some of them are standing tall and being strong. Others are going very, very quiet at the moment. And this is certainly one of the things that we found as a result of COVID, that the strong companies, this is an opportunity for them to show their muscle, to almost impose themselves on their categories. There's a famous quote from Procter & Gamble where the CEO, A.J. Lafley, said a few years ago that in difficult times he would not cut the budget for marketing. He might move it into different areas, but he would not cut it because he wanted to actually increase his share of voice, increase his market share. And this was a good time to do it because a lot of other people were going quiet. Some were even going out of business. So he said, we're the big boys here and we get to show who's the boss of this sector. And that's, I think, what they're doing again as we speak at the moment. Procter & Gamble remains very strong. And that's where, when you look at some of the categories here, some of the companies, some of the brands have gone quiet. And I think that's not the right strategy.
Okay, so not the time for a treat. I mean, finally, take us through that graph where you show how you assess the risk and just tell us about some of the brands that could emerge stronger, but some that are really in the line of fire now.
Well, yes, when you actually look at the strongest brands, you've mentioned Life and Bidvest. Bidvest has come up, which has intrigued some people. And down the bottom of the list, you see people like the Netcares. So you've got to actually manage yourself through this. We know that as a sector in South Africa, the property sector is taking quite a hit. You only have to look at the UK, where, in fact, major property companies like Intu have basically gone to the wall. So you've got to manage your risk, you've got to manage your cash flow, you've got to make sure that you get through this crisis. And to be honest, the ones that get through this crisis are the ones that will bounce probably the strongest back up again. But there's going to be a thinning out of all sectors. And it's not just in South Africa. South Africa is not an island. We're finding around the world the weak guys are being found out. I think it was Warren Buffett who said, when the tide goes out, you find who's swimming naked. And the tide has gone out. It's gone out in a dramatic way. People never expected this. And I'm afraid there are going to be some people who aren't going to survive. But the big boys, the stronger boys, should all manage to power their way through.
All right, thank you so much. Fascinating brands really being tested by COVID-19. That was the MD of Brand Finance Africa, Jeremy Sampson. Now, the South African National